Sandfall Interactive's RPG Clair Obscur Expedition 33 has come out of nowhere to basically turn the games industry upside down. In this review, I'll try to explain what the game does so well and how it defies the idea that the gaming medium has become stagnant or unfun, provided you know where to look. Some say games are getting worse, it's true. This passion project from ex-Ubisoft devs, Sandfall Interactive, may be the exception that proves the rule. Simply put, they've set out to create an instant RPG classic highly reminiscent of PS2 JRPGs, like 2001's Final Fantasy X, with technology that could only come from today, ideas that often reinvent the wheel, and an overall aesthetic sensibility that could only come from France. The result is something nearing lightning in a bottle. Sandfall's potent blend of old and new shouldn't work, but it does. It works really, really well. In Clair Obscur, you play as members of the titular Expedition 33, who live in a surreal dark fantasy world that feels like some weird love child between Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy XVI, Death Stranding, Shin Megami Tensei, and Elden Ring. It's a post-apocalyptic fantasy with light sci-fi elements and drips with dreamy, if tragic, surrealism. And let's not forget the novel rhythm game-esque central battle mechanic that makes Expedition 33 so addictive. These features are kind of what make this game both so good and so unusual. A labor of love that isn't trying to please everyone, but rather a very well-defined niche of players whose buttons Sandfall have learned how to manipulate, evidently thanks to what was clearly decades of playing emotionally abusive games like Final Fantasy X. The influence of that series, and in particular 10, 16, and 7 Rebirth, is clear from the get-go, as is the influence played by the other aforementioned RPGs, and ones I didn't cover like Baldur's Gate 3. But Clair Obscur's brilliance is not merely in assembling great influences. Sandfall deserved credit for fusing classic formulae together so cleverly, all to create something brand new. Expedition 33 is a reinvention of the RPG format that paradoxically draws from lots of things, yet also takes no design norm or element for granted. The devs seem to grasp exactly when to rely on traditions and when to rethink them out of instinct, and it's quite a sight to behold. For starters, thanks to the way Expedition 33's level progression and skill system works, thanks to the rhythms of its unique battles with their hybridization between turn-based and real-time combat, there are no conventional RPG classes in this game like Mage or Rogue. Instead, each party member has their own unique role, mechanics, and possible abilities that can't be easily or generically reduced to familiar classic archetypes taken from Dungeons & Dragons. Expedition 33 creates its own new archetypes and traditions with an enviable stylistic confidence and clarity. Clair Obscur's first major virtue, perhaps, is knowing when to follow tradition and when to innovate, to play it safe and get creative. Its second major virtue, not so coincidentally, is knowing when to draw from turn-based and real-time design ideas. But to understand this virtue, we need to consider recent Final Fantasies, like 16 or 7 Rebirth. Square's flagship franchise Final Fantasy has debatably struggled to balance Western and Eastern flavors anywhere this well for years. Yet, ironically, 16 and 7 Rebirth undeniably crawled so Clair Obscur could run. In different yet related ways, 16 and Rebirth sought to free up Final Fantasy's inner intensity and fun from its late 20th century, completely turn-based origins. These more real-time action-oriented Final Fantasies took the storied RPG series into new territory, new action game territory. I've really enjoyed the first two in that series and can't wait for the third one. If you ask me, I think Square have hit a pretty good formula with their Final Fantasy VII remakes. After the debacle of Final Fantasy XIII, which alienated a Skyrim-ified global audience with its relatively impenetrable and comparatively old-fashioned design, Square, beginning with their in effect reboot of the Final Fantasy brand, Final Fantasy XV, have struggled to marry the series' roots with modern open-world sandbox action RPG elements. 16, both in terms of story and gameplay, improved on 15 by remembering to make a dramatic, heart-wrenching main story more of a proper focus. But as daring and great as 16 is, it's such an action game that it arguably lacks some of the strategic depth or intellectual challenge of, say, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Clair Obscur emerges as a sort of happy medium between these two, between Final Fantasy XVI and VII Rebirth, in terms of being an action RPG. Expedition 33 has an immediacy to the combat, which involves careful timing and muscle memory no less so than the best rhythm games. As a result, combat becomes a beautiful dance with or against the enemy that's a joy to try and master. By changing emphasis like this while still keeping things overall more turn-based RPG than not, Clair Obscur never feels too grindy or repetitive despite as a turn-based RPG in the vein of Final Fantasy games coming from maybe the single most grindy and repetitive genre of all. And that's quite an achievement. I always want one more try with this game, one more turn, one more battle, which for an RPG is bonkers, frankly. The way all this works revolves around setting up your skills individually as so-called pictos or learned collectively as a sort of secondary class of skills equipable by anyone in your party as so-called luminous. But either way, there are limits to how many abilities and which abilities each character can have, active at one time. Instead of abilities being something static that characters learn forever like in other RPGs, skills operate as a loadout of active abilities you can pick and choose as the situation warrants. Shuffling these around from time to time in menus is of course a necessity, reminiscent of simpler yet similar systems from, for example, Final Fantasy IX. Given this blend of mix and match, of individual skills and communal ones, and your ability to invest or reinvest skill points however you'd like, Clair Obscur hits the sweet spot between depth and playability, between linear storytelling and open-ended gameplay that really all RPGs nowadays should probably strive for. But an RPG is nothing without a strong cast of characters, fantastic world building, and a dramatic, compelling central plot, all of which Expedition 33 provides in excellent, decidedly French fashion. It's a dreamlike world right on the cusp between dark fantasy and romantic fable, which you often explore in traditional Final Fantasy fashion by roaming around a simplified overworld. And it's chock full of something else every great RPG needs: optional bosses, weapons, and cosmetics. But going slightly against the fashion in Western RPGs, Clair Obscur does not overload you with tons of side quests that distract you from the main story and pad the game experience out in its place. You won't find a Skyrim-style, MMO-influenced active checklist of multiple quests and objectives in this game, like you might in, say, Cyberpunk or Witcher 3. Most of the time, you won't even be sure where you're going at all in Clair Obscur, given Expedition 33's biggest flaw, its relative lack of navigational HUD tools like a minimap or really much of any map whatsoever. This minor downside aside, Clair Obscur's retro influences get expressed through modern technology and novel, counterintuitive yet brilliant design ideas in ways that feel fresh and exciting, more often than not. It's the best RPG in many years, one whose own influence on the industry will no doubt be felt for years to come. Clair Obscur has already secured its place on the Mount Olympus of all-time best RPGs, I would say. I can't wait to see it grow into an influential, iconic series of its own, or how Square's next big Final Fantasy will potentially try and respond, or sort of learn from it. Whether games in general may or may not be on the decline is up for debate, but it seems RPGs of the post-Baldur's Gate 3 era are getting better and better. Until next time, boss.